That rifle is bigger than you, Petty Officer Luke Dawson said, loud enough for the whole armory to hear. You sure you are not just polishing someone else's legend? The laughter that followed was small, careless, and young, the kind men used when they wanted a room to agree with them before the truth had a chance to enter. Sergeant Claire Mitchell did not look up. She sat alone at the maintenance table inside the Naval Special Warfare Armory in Coronado, the morning still gray beyond the high windows, the smell of gun oil and cold steel hanging in the air. In front of her, the Barrett M82 rested in careful pieces on a dark cloth, each component aligned with a precision that made the table look less like a workspace and more like an altar to responsibility. The receiver sat to her left. The bolt assembly lay clean and open. The optic mount had already been checked twice, not because she doubted herself, but because small mistakes did not stay small when distance, wind, and trust were involved. Claire wore a faded field uniform with softened seams at the shoulders and sleeves worn pale near the cuffs. Her white skin looked almost colorless under the fluorescent lights, her light brown hair tied low at the back of her neck, her face calm in a way that did not invite conversation. She was not tall. She was not loud. She carried no display of medals, no dramatic rank, no need to explain why her hands moved across the M82 with the patient confidence of someone who had known its weight in worse places than an armory. Dawson leaned against the opposite table with two younger operators beside him, both watching her with the uneasy amusement of men trying to decide whether disrespect was safer in a group. Careful with that thing, Dawson added. It is not a prop from a recruiting poster. Claire slid a cleaning patch through the bore and drew it back slowly. The motion was smooth, economical, almost silent. She inspected the patch, set it aside, and reached for the next tool without turning her head. That silence irritated Dawson more than an answer would have. He stepped closer, boots sounding against the concrete floor. I asked you a question. Claire's eyes remained on the rifle. No, she said quietly. You made an assumption. The room tightened by 1 degree. One of the younger men stopped smiling. Dawson gave a short laugh, but it had less air behind it now. Then correct me. Claire set the rod down and picked up a small ammunition case from the edge of the table. It was plain, dark, and older than the rest of her gear, with a latch polished by years of being opened carefully. She placed it beside the M82 and lifted the lid. Inside were 5 rounds, each separated in black foam, each cleaned and kept with the care of something that had outlived its original purpose. For carried small markings near the casing, worn almost invisible. The 5th was brighter, newer, and engraved with a full name in careful letters, Ethan Vale. Dawson saw it before he understood it. What is that supposed to be? He asked, reaching toward the case. Claire's hand moved first. Not fast enough to startle the room, not hard enough to make a scene, only certain enough to stop him before his fingers crossed the line. For the first time, she looked up. Her gray eyes were steady, cold not with anger, but with memory. Do not touch a name you did not carry, she said. The laughter died completely. At the armory door, SEAL Chief Aaron Blake had just stepped inside, and the moment he heard the name, his expression changed. Chief Aaron Blake did not move right away. He stood just inside the armory door, one hand still near the access panel, his eyes fixed on the open ammunition case beside the disassembled M82. The name Ethan Vale sat in the foam like a sentence nobody in the room knew how to finish. Dawson noticed the chief's silence before he understood its meaning. The two younger operators beside him straightened by instinct, their amusement draining into caution. Claire's hand remained between Dawson and the case, steady enough to make the boundary clear without turning it into a threat. Chief, Dawson said, trying to recover the room with a casual tone that no longer fit. We were just asking about the rifle. Blake looked at him once. That was enough. Dawson closed his mouth. The chief stepped closer, his boots quiet on the concrete, his face controlled but changed in a way Claire recognized before anyone else did. Recognition had weight. It slowed men down. It made them careful. Blake stopped at the edge of the table and looked over the M82 components without touching them. Receiver aligned with the bore facing away from the room. Bolt assembly cleaned but not overoiled. Optic mount checked and marked. Ammunition case placed within reach but apart from the active workspace. This was not display. This was habit. Who taught you to lay out a Barrett like that? Blake asked. Claire lowered her hand only after Dawson stepped back. Someone who hated wasted movement. Blake's eyes shifted to the final round. That someone have a name? Claire returned to the cleaning cloth and folded it once, corner to corner. Most people do. The answer was quiet, and somehow it made the room even quieter. Dawson frowned, still trying to understand why the atmosphere had turned against him. Chief, with respect, it is a bullet with a name on it. I did not know we were treating souvenirs like classified material now. Claire did not react. Blake did. Not loudly. Not dramatically. He turned his head just enough that Dawson understood he had stepped too far. You ever carry a name, Dawson? The chief asked. Dawson hesitated. Sir, not on paper. Not on a roster. I mean carry it because someone trusted you to bring it home. Dawson had no answer ready for that. The younger operators looked down at the table, suddenly interested in anything except the case. Claire picked up the bolt assembly and inspected the lugs under the light. Her hands were calm, but Blake saw the faint pause before she set it down again. A pause measured in less than a second. Enough for a man who had spent 20 years around operators to know the rifle was not the only thing being maintained. Ethan Vale, Blake said softly. The name changed shape in his mouth. Not rumor. Not file. Person. Claire's eyes lifted to him. You knew him. It was not a question. Blake looked at the engraved round again. I served under him for 11 months. Before Silent Ridge disappeared behind black ink and locked doors. The younger operators exchanged a quick look. Dawson went still. Silent Ridge was not something people joked about because most of them were not supposed to know it existed. Claire closed the ammunition case halfway, leaving the final round visible but protected beneath the shadow of the lid. Then you know why that name is not for display. Blake studied her face now, the faded uniform, the quiet hands, the absence of explanation. I know Vale did not leave many people behind who can say his name like that. Claire slid the bolt back into the receiver with a clean, controlled motion. The metal seated with a soft click. He left enough, she said. If anyone remembered how to listen. The soft click of the bolt returning to place seemed to settle the room into a different kind of order. Before that moment, the armory had belonged to noise, Dawson's joke, the younger operator's laughter, the casual confidence of men who thought a rifle could only tell the story they expected. Now it belonged to the table, the M82, the half-closed ammunition case, and the name still visible beneath the shadow of the lid. Chief Blake stood across from Claire, reading details the others had missed. The way she checked the receiver without looking rushed. The way she kept the muzzle direction clean even while the rifle remained disassembled. The way her fingers paused near the engraved round but never touched it without purpose. None of it came from a manual alone. Manuals taught sequence. They did not teach reverence. Silent Ridge was sealed, Blake said. No after-action report. No personnel list. No confirmation of who held Overwatch. Claire picked up the optic mount and inspected the screws under the light. Some reports are written to protect the living. Blake's eyes narrowed slightly. And some are written to bury the people who did the work. Dawson shifted his weight near the other table, uncomfortable now but not ready to disappear. Pride had already carried him too far into the room. Chief, he said carefully, are you saying she was there? Claire did not look at him. Blake did not answer at first. He watched her align the optic mount with the receiver and tighten each point with deliberate pressure, not too much, never uneven, the kind of control that came from knowing what a fraction of an inch could mean at distance. I am saying, Blake replied, that most people who handle an M82 like that have either trained for years under someone who knew the field, or they learned because the field did not give them another choice. The room absorbed that. One of the younger operators swallowed. Dawson glanced at the rifle again, but this time there was no mockery in his face. Only the beginning of a question he did not know how to ask. Claire set the tool down. You came for a range inspection, she said to Blake. Not a ghost story. Blake gave a faint nod. I came because weapons were due for verification. Then I heard a name I have not heard spoken in this building in 5 years. Claire closed the ammunition case fully this time. The latch snapped shut, small and final. Names do not disappear because files do. Blake looked at her for a long moment. That sentence had the sound of someone who had spent years refusing to let paperwork decide what memory was allowed to keep. He lowered his voice. Where did you get Ethan Vale's name? Claire rested both hands on the edge of the table. Her face remained calm, but her eyes had gone distant, focused on something beyond the armory walls, beyond the clean concrete floor and the safe morning light. He gave it to me before the last extraction window closed. No one moved. The words were not dramatic, but they changed the air anyway. Dawson's expression faltered. The younger operators stood straighter without being told. Blake's face tightened with the effort of staying professional. "That was never in the file," he said. Claire looked down at the M82, now nearly whole again. "No," she said. "The file was not there." Blake understood before the others did. He looked at the closed case, then at her faded sleeve, then at the rifle she had treated like a promise rather than a tool. "Who were you on that ridge?" Claire did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached beneath the collar of her uniform and drew out a small white-silver badge on a worn chain. It was shaped like a falcon in clean flight, with a thin mark of lightning behind it. Dawson stared at it, confused. Blake did not. His posture changed at once. The chief who had entered for inspection now stood in front of a symbol he had only heard about in quiet rooms and unfinished briefings. "White Falcon," he said, almost under his breath. Claire let the badge rest against her palm. "Silent Overwatch," she said. That was the name they used when they needed someone to stay after everyone else was told to leave. The words White Falcon changed the room more completely than any raised voice could have. Dawson looked from the badge to Chief Blake, waiting for someone to explain it in a way that would let him recover his earlier confidence. No explanation came. Blake stood still, his expression locked between recognition and disbelief, like a man watching a name from a sealed file step into the light. The two younger operators did not understand the full history, but they understood the chief's reaction. They straightened without being ordered. Claire let the badge rest in her palm for only a second longer before slipping it back beneath her collar. She had not shown it to impress them. She had shown it because the room had reached the edge of truth and needed something stronger than rumor to cross it. Blake drew a slow breath. "We were told White Falcon was an outside asset." Claire returned her attention to the M82, fitting the final component into place with quiet precision. "That made the paperwork easier. We were told no one stayed on Overwatch after the withdrawal order. That made the report cleaner." Blake's jaw tightened. Dawson's eyes dropped to the ammunition case. For the first time, he seemed to understand that the jokes he had made had landed on ground he had never walked. Claire checked the rifle one final time, not with drama, but with the calm habit of someone who believed tools deserved respect because people depended on them. "Commander Vale knew the ridge was closing," she said. "He knew the window was smaller than Command believed. Before he moved his team, he gave me the names of the men still unaccounted for." Blake's voice lowered. "And the round?" Claire's hand paused over the case. "The last one was his idea." No one interrupted. Even the armory ventilation seemed quieter. He said if the mission survived the file, someone would need to remember why every decision mattered. Blake looked down, and for a moment he was no longer the chief inspecting weapons. He was a man hearing the voice of a commander he had thought history had taken from him entirely. Dawson stepped back from the table, shame settling across his face in a way that made him look younger. "Sergeant," he said, then stopped. There was no apology clean enough to undo what he had said. Claire looked at him without anger. That made it worse and easier at the same time. "Do not apologize to make yourself feel better," she said. "Do better the next time you do not understand what you are looking at." Dawson nodded once, slowly. "Yes, Sergeant." Blake reached toward the ammunition case, then stopped before touching it. He had learned the boundary. "May I read the name again?" Claire studied him for a moment, then opened the case herself. The final round caught the overhead light, Ethan Vale engraved along the side in careful letters. Blake read it silently this time. His eyes did not leave the name until Claire closed the lid again. Across the room, a secure terminal near the inventory wall gave a soft tone. One of the younger operators turned toward it. "Chief, we have an incoming restricted notice." Blake did not move at first. Claire already knew before the screen refreshed. Some doors opened only when someone finally spoke the name that had been keeping them locked. The monitor brightened, and a single line appeared beneath a classified header. Silent Ridge file reopened for witness verification. Dawson looked at Claire. Blake looked at the closed case. Claire placed one hand on the M82 and the other on the ammunition box, caught between the weapon that had carried the mission and the name that had carried the cost. "Looks like the file started listening," she said. The restricted notice stayed on the monitor, cold and simple, as if 5 years of silence had been reduced to one clean line of text. Silent Ridge file reopened for witness verification. No one in the armory spoke at first. Chief Blake moved toward the terminal, but his eyes kept returning to Claire, the M82, and the closed ammunition case beside her hand. Dawson stood behind him, no longer leaning, no longer trying to fill the room with confidence he had not earned. The two younger operators watched the screen as if it might explain what their laughter had nearly stepped on. Claire did not move toward the terminal. She stayed with the rifle. That told Blake something important. To most people, a reopened file meant answers. To Claire, it meant a door she had spent years holding shut had finally opened from the other side. Witness verification, Blake read quietly. They want testimony. Claire picked up the final cleaning cloth and wiped the outside of the receiver with slow, exact strokes. They want names. Blake looked over his shoulder. You have them. Claire's hand paused on the metal. I kept what I was given. Dawson glanced at the ammunition case, finally understanding that the 5 rounds were not decorations, not superstition, not some dramatic ritual. They were a record made by a person who did not trust history to remember on its own. Blake turned to the younger operator nearest the terminal. Lock the armory feed. No outside chatter. Mark this compartment restricted until further notice. Yes, Chief. The operator moved quickly, grateful for an order that made sense. Blake stepped back to the table. Sergeant Mitchell, I need to ask this formally. Are you willing to provide witness verification for Silent Ridge? Claire set the cloth down and looked at the closed case. Her answer did not come right away. The armory was safe. Clean floors, labeled racks, logged weapons, air conditioning humming above them. Nothing like the places where memory usually found her. But safety had never erased responsibility. Willing is the wrong word, she said. Blake accepted that. Are you able? Claire lifted her eyes to him. Able is why I came. Dawson looked at her then, truly looked, seeing the faded uniform, the controlled hands, the quiet badge hidden beneath the collar, and the rifle she had assembled as if each piece carried someone's trust. You came here because of the file? He asked. Claire closed the dust cover on the M82. I came because the file was going to open whether people were ready or not. Blake frowned slightly. Who told you? Claire tapped the ammunition case once, lightly. The last name. Before anyone could ask what that meant, the terminal gave another soft tone. A second line appeared under the first. Primary witness requested, White Falcon. Blake exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. Dawson read the words, then looked at Claire with the kind of respect that arrives late and knows it has no right to ask for comfort. Claire lifted the ammunition case and set it directly in front of Blake. Then we start with Commander Ethan Vale, she said. Blake did not touch the case until she nodded. When he opened it, the final round caught the light again, the name clear and steady along the casing. Claire stood beside the M82, shoulders square, voice low. He was not the end of the story, she said. He was the reason I kept listening after everyone else stopped. Blake looked at the screen, then at her. And the other 4? Claire's eyes moved to the hidden markings on the remaining rounds. Those are the doors behind this one. The armory seemed smaller now, as if every wall had learned a secret. Dawson lowered his gaze. Sergeant, he said carefully, what do you need from us? Claire looked at him, not forgiving him exactly, but giving him work instead of shame. Discipline, she said, and silence until the truth can stand without being mishandled. Dawson nodded. This time, there was no performance in it. Chief Blake closed the case with care and placed both hands on the table. Then the armory is yours. Claire looked at the M82, then at the monitor where White Falcon waited in official letters after years of being buried in whispers. No, she said quietly. The truth is. Chief Blake did not repeat the word truth. He simply accepted the weight of it and began changing the room around that standard. The younger operator sealed the armory feed. The access light above the door shifted from green to red, and the morning outside the high windows faded into something distant. What had been a routine weapons inspection was now a controlled compartment, quiet enough for buried names to become official again. Claire stood at the maintenance table with the M82 fully assembled in front of her, not loaded, not displayed, just present. It looked different now. The men who had joked about its size no longer saw a heavy rifle on a bench. They saw a witness made of steel, glass, and memory, cared for by the only person in the room who had stayed with the story after the paperwork stopped. Blake opened a secure drawer beneath the terminal and removed a blank verification packet. He placed it beside the ammunition case, then looked at Claire. "We will proceed by sequence. Name, role, last confirmed status, and what you personally observed." Dawson turned away from the table, as if giving her space could undo the way he had entered it. Claire noticed, but did not tell him to leave. Shame was only useful if it became discipline. "Dawson," she said. He turned back immediately. "Yes, Sergeant." Inventory log. Every item on this table. Exact condition. No assumptions. He moved at once, taking a tablet from the side station. This time, he did not touch anything without asking. Blake saw it and said nothing. Claire opened the ammunition case herself. The 5 rounds sat in their foam channels, quiet and impossible to ignore. She lifted the first one, not the final round, but the oldest. A single letter had been engraved near the casing, almost worn smooth. M. Blake read from beside her. Claire nodded. Mason Reed, communications specialist. He kept the last relay open long enough for the second team to hear the change in route. Blake wrote the name down. The younger operators stood still, learning that history did not always arrive in medals and speeches. Sometimes it arrived as one letter on brass, held by a woman everyone had mistaken for someone cleaning another man's legend. Claire placed the first round back into its slot and lifted the second. J. Jonah Pierce. Boat crew. He found the break in the current when the first extraction map failed. Blake's pen paused only once, then moved again. Dawson typed carefully, his face tight with concentration. Claire continued with the third and fourth names, each one spoken without embellishment, without drama, without turning memory into performance. She gave enough for the record and no more than dignity allowed. By the time she reached the final round, the room had learned how to listen. Ethan Vale's name caught the overhead light again. Blake's hand stilled above the verification form. "Commander Ethan Vale," Claire said. Her voice remained steady, but the air seemed to draw closer around it. "Team lead." He understood the ridge before command accepted the error. He gave me the names because he knew the report might not carry them. Blake looked up. "And what did he ask you to do?" Claire looked at the M82. "Remember accurately." The answer was smaller than anyone expected and heavier because of it. Dawson stopped typing for half a second, then corrected himself and continued. Blake wrote the words into the packet exactly as she said them. "Remember accurately." The terminal chimed again, and a new field opened on the screen. White Falcon witness statement acknowledged. Awaiting corroboration file. Blake frowned. "There is another file." Claire closed the ammunition case with care. "There should be." "Where?" She touched the side of the M82 case beneath the table, pressing a small worn latch hidden near the hinge. A narrow compartment opened, revealing a sealed data wafer wrapped in faded tape marked with the White Falcon symbol. Dawson stared, but did not speak. Blake looked from the wafer to Claire with quiet understanding. She had not come to the armory to be found. She had come to decide whether the room was finally worthy of what she had kept. Claire lifted the wafer and placed it beside the verification packet. "The last bullet carried the name," she said. "This carries what the file forgot." The sealed data wafer looked too small to carry the weight everyone placed on it. It was no wider than 2 fingers, wrapped in faded tape, marked by the White Falcon symbol Claire had kept hidden for years. Chief Blake did not reach for it immediately. Neither did Dawson. The room had learned its lesson. Some things were not touched until the person carrying them decided the moment had earned it. Claire placed the wafer beside the verification packet and rested her hand flat on the table. "Before we open this," she said, "you need to understand why it stayed hidden." Blake stood across from her, serious and still. "Go ahead." Claire looked at the ammunition case first, then at the M82. Silent Ridge was not lost because people lacked courage. It was lost because people trusted the clean version of the map more than the people standing on the ground. Dawson stopped typing. The younger operators listened without moving. Claire's voice remained calm, but each word seemed measured against something she refused to waste. The first report said the extraction route was stable. It was not. The first weather window said there was time. There was not. The first command estimate said everyone could move together. They could not. Blake lowered his eyes to the verification packet. The names were lined in his handwriting now, Official for the first time in years. Mason Reed. Jonah Pierce. 2 others. Ethan Vale. And Vale knew? He asked. He knew before anyone wanted to hear it. Claire's fingers touched the edge of the wafer, not lifting it yet. He started making a second record because he believed the truth would need proof after the mission became too inconvenient to explain. Dawson looked up. That is what the wafer is. Claire turned toward him. There was no anger in her face, only the same cold patience that had stopped his hand from touching the final round. It is not a trophy. It is not a secret to make anyone feel important. It is a record of decisions, corrections, timing errors, and names people nearly turned into blanks. Dawson nodded once, slower than before. Understood. Blake opened a secure reader from the terminal drawer and set it on the table. Chain of custody starts now. Sergeant Mitchell, you will place the file yourself. Claire picked up the wafer with 2 fingers and set it into the reader. The terminal screen went dark, then came back in blue light. A verification seal appeared, followed by 3 words, White Falcon Archive. No one breathed loudly. A list of folders loaded one by one. Tide corrections. Alternate route. Relay logs. Personnel markers. Final audio notes. Blake stared at the screen as if every file name had reached back through 5 years and taken hold of his uniform. Dawson's tablet lowered slightly in his hands. He was no longer logging equipment. He was witnessing the shape of what he had almost dismissed. The terminal requested a voice confirmation. Blake looked at Claire. She stepped closer, her pale face lit by the blue screen, the White Falcon badge hidden again beneath her collar. Sergeant Claire Mitchell, she said. Call sign White Falcon. Witness verification for Silent Ridge. The system paused, then accepted her voice. A final folder unlocked at the bottom of the screen. Its label was simple, Veil Directive. Blake's expression changed. Claire did not open it right away. Her hand hovered near the command key, steady but not untouched by the moment. This is the part he did not give to command, she said. Blake's voice dropped. Who did he give it to? Claire looked at the final round in the case. Whoever stayed long enough to remember accurately. Then she opened the file. The speakers crackled once, low and old with compression, and Commander Ethan Vale's recorded voice filled the armory, calm, tired, and unmistakably alive in memory. If White Falcon is hearing this inside a secure room, the voice said. Then somebody finally asked the right question. Commander Ethan Vale's voice did not rise above the speakers, but it took command of the armory as completely as if he had walked through the door. Somebody finally asked the right question. The recording paused under a layer of static. No one looked at Claire. Not yet. It felt wrong to watch the person who had carried that voice in silence while the rest of the room heard it for the first time. Chief Blake stood with both hands on the edge of the table, his eyes fixed on the secure terminal. Dawson held the tablet against his chest, all earlier arrogance gone, replaced by the careful stillness of a man afraid to disturb something sacred. The recording continued. If this archive is being opened, then Silent Ridge was not left in the ground. Good. That means White Falcon kept her promise. Claire's face did not change, but one hand closed briefly at her side before opening again. Blake noticed. So did Dawson. Neither said a word. Vale's voice carried the rough calm of a commander leaving instructions for a future he might never see. The official route failed before the first clock started. White Falcon corrected it. The relay stayed open because Mason Reed refused to let the weather own the signal. Jonah Pierce found water where the map said none existed. The team moved because 4 people made decisions faster than command made peace with being wrong. Blake lowered his head for 1 second. The names on the verification packet were no longer just testimony. They had become voices given back through one man's final record. Claire looked at the ammunition case, then at the M82 resting silent on the cloth. The rifle had no glory in that moment, only responsibility. The recording shifted, static thinning. If anyone is listening for blame, stop. Learn instead. Pride delays correction. Distance makes reports clean. But the ground is never clean for the people standing on it. Dawson swallowed hard. It was the first sound he had made in minutes. Claire turned her eyes toward him, not sharply, but enough for him to understand the lesson was not locked in the past. It was standing in the room with them. Vale's voice came again, softer now. White Falcon stayed when she was told to leave because she understood the Ridge was still speaking. Believe her. Not because of the badge. Not because of the weapon. because she listened when listening cost her. Blake's jaw tightened. He looked at Claire then, and the respect in his face no longer needed confirmation from a file. The terminal displayed a new prompt. Corroboration complete. Witness record validated. Dawson looked at the words, then set the tablet down with both hands, careful and quiet. "Sergeant," he said, his voice low, "I was wrong before I knew enough to have an opinion." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "That happens often," she said. "The damage depends on whether a man stays wrong after the truth arrives." Dawson nodded, accepting the weight without defense. Blake turned back to the screen as one final audio note loaded beneath Vale's directive. The file name appeared in plain text, "For the final round." Claire went still. The room felt it immediately. Blake did not ask permission with words. He simply looked at her. After a moment, Claire nodded. He opened the file. Vale's voice returned, quieter than before, worn thin but steady. "Claire, if they ever read my name from that casing, tell them this. The last bullet was never meant for revenge. It was meant to remind the living that every first decision has a cost." The recording ended. No one moved. Claire closed the ammunition case with both hands, not to hide the name, but to protect it from being handled carelessly again. Outside the armory, Coronado moved through an ordinary morning. Inside, the laughter that had started the day was gone, replaced by a silence that finally understood what it had mocked. The silence held long after the final audio note ended. Chief Blake kept his eyes on the secure terminal, where the words "Witness Record Validated" remained in pale blue letters. Dawson stood beside the inventory table with his hands empty for the first time that morning, as if he no longer trusted himself to touch anything without understanding its weight. The younger operators stayed near the locked armory door, quiet and upright, no longer spectators to a strange moment, but witnesses to a truth that had finally found a room disciplined enough to hold it. Claire rested one palm on the closed ammunition case and the other near the M82, not gripping either one, only standing with them as if the rifle, the names, and the record had all completed the same long march back into the light. Blake turned from the terminal. "The validation packet will move to command review within the hour," he said. "After that, Silent Ridge becomes official history." Claire looked at the ammunition case. Official is not the same as complete. Blake understood. The other doors. Claire nodded once. The 4 marked rounds waited inside the case, each carrying less visible engraving than Ethan Vale's, each tied to a decision, a correction, or a person the clean report had nearly erased. Dawson looked at the case, then at Claire. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, careful with every word. "I know I have not earned the right to ask, but if there is work to be done, I would like to help do it correctly." Claire studied him. Earlier, he had wanted the room to laugh with him. Now he wanted instruction, and there was a difference. "Then start by logging what you know, not what you assume," she said. Dawson nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." Blake closed the secure reader and removed the data wafer only after the system released it. He placed it back on the table in front of Claire, not as evidence being returned, but as trust being acknowledged. "White Falcon stays attached to the review," he said. "No one handles this without your presence." Claire slipped the wafer back into its protective wrap and tucked it into the hidden compartment beneath the M82 case. The motion was smooth, familiar, final for now. She then lifted the rifle with the care of a technician and the respect of someone who knew it was never only steel. She placed it back into its hard case, checked the latches, and left the White Falcon badge hidden beneath her collar. She had shown it once. That had been enough. The red access light above the armory door remained on. Outside, the base moved through an ordinary morning of schedules, inspections, and voices that did not know what had changed behind that locked door. Inside, every man understood that respect had not arrived because of rank, weapon, or rumor. It had arrived because the truth had been given room to stand. Blake looked at Dawson and the younger operators. "This room stays sealed until the review team arrives. No stories, no speculation. No turning names into legends before they become records." "Yes, Chief," they answered together. Claire picked up the ammunition case. Before she closed it into her gear bag, she opened it once more and looked at the final round. Ethan Vale's name caught the light, steady and clear. She did not speak to it. She did not need to. Blake watched her close the lid, and his voice softened without losing command. "What happens now?" Claire looked toward the secure terminal, where a new notification appeared under the validated file. Additional witness markers pending. A quiet breath moved through the room. The season had not ended with one name. It had begun there. Claire lifted her gear bag over one shoulder and looked at Dawson, Blake, and the two young operators who had learned more from one morning of silence than from a month of noise. Now, she said, we remember accurately.